off to the DR, where nobody believes that what you do is who you are. I'm tired of obsessing over numbers on a screen. Not stressing over money has become my only dream.
What's up, guys? Today we're gonna talk about how to create a hyperpop song, kind of like Brakence, kind of like 100 gecs. The thing with this music is that it really comes down to how you are selecting the elements that you're selecting, how you're processing them. A lot of times it's a lot of like warped sounding sounds, really like clangy or distorted drums, and vocals that are as affected as you could possibly make them. So let me play the song real quick, and I know some of you guys are gonna say this doesn't really sound like Brakence at all. Probably because it's not, but check out my song, my take on this genre.
To the DR, where nobody believes that what you do is who you are. I'm tired of obsessing over numbers on a screen. Not stressing over money has become my only dream. It's funny to compete for shit I swore I never need. Don't talk to me, I'm driving, can't you see I'm in the lead? So I'm treated like a saint as if some clout could make you rich. I'm telling you right now, these LA taxes don't forgive. I'm tired of going to war. Every fucking time I try to open the door, my mind is burned from trying to turn the black into gold. Tell everyone back home I'm busy cracking the code. Fall back and reload. I'm tired of going to war. Every fucking time I try to open the door, my mind is burned from trying to turn the black into gold. Tell everyone.
Alright, so this is my song, and I took a lot of influence from, you know, artists like 100 gecs and some Brakence influence in here as well. The first thing that I want to talk about is the drums. So it's very obvious that you want to have like a glitchy sort of hyper poppy drum sound. So luckily Arcade actually hit me up, I think like about a year ago, and commissioned a video from me to make like a hyper pop sounding song with their kit. So kind of a shortcut to this drum sound is the fact that I used some of the samples from that library. So here's what some of those sound like. So here are the drums by themselves in the chorus. So I mean, the kick is nothing too special, but you do need to have a really punchy kick. What I do is I set up all my kicks in this one little like treasure trove of kicks. So it's like, which kick did I go with? So that is an Umru kick. Umru is this fantastic hyperpop artist, and it's a very punchy kick. It's got some distortion to it. The main thing is the punchiness to it. I actually think I added some more. I added a fuck ton of plugins to this, wow. But I think the biggest thing is that I just like cranked that like low sort of like beefy sub in that kick, this here. That way it really cuts through in the low end. These snares, I'll just kind of go through them one by one. So that's the first arcade snare. That's the second arcade snare. They're all very like sort of clangy and distorted sounding. And then I have this one on the offbeat. And then I have another clangy snare that I added in here that's basically a very clangy snare. Like the clang snare is a staple in hyperpop music. So this is actually a couple of samples layered on top of each other. It's this, with that, and then this is where you get the clang sound from. Then I also had this hi-hat loop, and this kind of just came as a loop in Arcade, but I have some other hi-hats here in the verse that I could go into. Hyperpop hi-hats are a lot of fun because you can really get creative in terms of whether you're pitching them around, whether you're kind of like warping them. So this is the hi-hat loop that I made. What kind of gives it that like almost like alien-y hi-hat hyperpop sound is the fact that I'm pitching this down, and that's what kind of gives it that like filtered sound. One of the most important things about hyperpop is obviously the 808. So I have a ton of basses layered together, especially in this chorus section. So this is the 808. And so the way that I got this insane 808 sound is actually by distorting the crap out of it, as you could have guessed. So this is before I distorted it. It's basically just going through isotope trash on this hyperpop bass distortion setting. And then what I did actually that gives it that sort of like wide distorted sound is that I sent it to a bus. So this is with just the regular 808 with some distortion that I added on here. And then I sent it to this like 808 wide bus, and what I'm doing is I'm actually adding a little bit of R bass mids, and then here's the trick. I'm actually distorting the living piss out of it with this Manny distortion, and then I reverse the phase on one side using this like plug-in here. And that's what gives it that like extremely spread out 808 sound. But it's like an extremely distorted spread out 808 sound. By the way, I filtered that part so that it's just in the top end. That way like the phasing shit isn't fucking with the low end in the like main 808. Then I also layered on a ton of other basses as well, like this bass blaster that was actually an arcade sound. So here's the bass blaster. It's just like a spread out sounding like gritty bass, you know? And then here's basically just like a guitar sound. All right, so let's talk about some of these sort of like glitchy, hyper-poppy sounding synths that I added. So first off, I had a couple of other sort of like arcade synths that I added in that really have a warped sound to them. So here's this like weird clock sound, and it's very like boopy, but also like distorted at the same time. And then here's this overhyped sound. This is almost like a tire screechy kind of sound, and this is very sort of typical in terms of like the 100 gex types of synths. They're very distorted. You can't really like pin them down in terms of like what even is this. So I layered those on top of each other, and then on top of that I also added my own like screechy synth. So here's what these sound like. So this is actually just Sylenth. So I kind of downloaded this. It was like just a Sylenth preset. And do you hear how it's very like almost dissonant? It's kind of like detuned a little bit. So the sort of like detuned, almost dissonant sound is really a characteristic of hyperpop, almost like, you know, anxiety-inducing synths that they add to these types of songs. So now here's the chorus with pretty much like all that stuff added in. And then I also have a couple of sort of like texture-y synths. Like before in this other section here, I have this, and it's just a couple of basses on top of each other to kind of add a more like ambient bassy sound. And then in the verse, I have a couple of other synths as well. Like this one, this is also an arcade synth. So that's the first one, then the second one is layered on top of that. It's very like dreamy sounding, you know what I mean? Very, very poppy, but it really fits in the context of this song.
I'm tired of obsessing over numbers on a screen.
One more thing, in the bridge section of this song, something that I did not actually play out, I have some real guitars happening. So Brakence uses a lot of real guitars, especially sort of like clean, almost like Midwest emo sounding guitars. Some songs use distorted guitars as well. Like in this song, I found that a distorted guitar actually worked really well.
Even the peace, the wires in my mind won't let me sleep till I'm free. From every endless struggle, I made plans to escape. The last time I admitted I did better today. Embarrassed to say.
It's very like classic, almost like Green Day-esque sounding, you know? But guitars are just honestly like the goat for filling out the mid-range, so the distorted sound really worked well. I also layered on another synth, like another synth bass that kind of complemented all these sounds really well. It was this future bass sound. Kind of just added another like bassy texture on top, you know? So there are a lot of textury sounds that I added in this song as well. That's a very sort of like Brakence approach to it, is to add these very textury sounds. So if you go to the intro, that's probably the best example of, you know, where I add this stuff in. This sound here, this is a loop. And I just like time stretched it to fit the BPM right, and then kind of chopped it up a little bit. But very glitchy loop sounds. On top of that, I added a down riser. Another classic sort of part of this sound is just like, you know, transition effects. Literally just a serum patch that I did not make. Don't credit me for that. And this rumble sound as well. And then a bunch of like haze that I layered on top of each other. These are just money, these right here. It's just a bunch of like hey samples layered on top of each other. Of course, a couple of risers. So this is very Brakence, like weird shit. You know what I mean? And he'll add like effects, like the fucking part in that one song that's like exclusive. You know what I mean? Just like random vocal shit. I think I low-key added something random here that you can't even hear in the song. Yeah, it's like, please hold. You hear it, right? But you see what I mean. The hold sound really adds a little bit here. So that's very Brakence, like all of these sort of like effects and like movie boom reverses and rumbles and like whatever you want to call all that shit. That's all the like Brakence influence in this song, you know? So let's talk about these vocals. Took me long enough, but I mean, to be honest, I've gone through vocal stuff before, unfortunately not on my own YouTube channel, but when I did the video for Hyperpop on how to create a hyperpop song. So these vocals are very much sort of my style of vocal with some of the hyperpop stuff sprinkled in. So if like I go to the pre-chorus, for example, that's the best place for you to hear where I really incorporate a lot of these other vocal sounds.
Easy to admit the sacrifice. You know you might be giving up the best years of your life. When failure after failure, but the promise is a shame.
So I'm obviously like flipping octaves in this song. So I'm just gonna loop just this one section just so you can hear it. So this is what the hyperpop vocal sounds like, just isolated.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
So this is actually the vocal chain that I made for the Hyperpop video, but what it is, it's like a ton of shit actually.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
So it's actually a main high vocal with a couple of doubles on the side. So this is kind of like more or less with the main vocal chain on it. Obviously it's got some effects on it, but mainly what gives it the sound is I'm putting trash on it, which is just a distortion plugin.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists. I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
So this is adding a lot more distortion to it. And then on top of that, little altar boy with the form and shift up a little bit.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
But not crazy, you know, just up a little bit basically. And then I'm sending it to a ton of effects, including like a doubler. I'm actually sending the highs to a lot of those effects. But I mean, those are the main things that you need to know about this vocal, is that it's really just like distortion and form shifting. The rest of it is very like standard. Really, it's just a ton of effects, you know what I mean? It's like adding reverb on. Here's without any of those effects.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
Like here's just the delay.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
I'm actually running the delay through a decapitator to give it a very distorted sound, and then running it through H delay
Reasons to believe it exists.
on like an 8th note. Then there's the reverb,
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
which is just mani verb. And then after that, I'm using this dimension in Nectar, which is just a chorus plugin, you know.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it.
And then on top of that, short reverb,
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
just to give it more girth, you know what I mean?
Running out of reasons to believe it exists.
Slapback delay, 50 millisecond slapback delay, phase inverted on one side.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
And a lot of these are blended super down into the mix.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
And then doubler.
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists.
You know, just add spread to it. A lot of these effects are very specific to me because I love that like extremely thick, extremely layered vocal sound. You know, you don't have to use all of these in your song, but this is just how I get that like insanely spread out vocal sound, you know?
I'm running out of reasons to believe it exists. The dreams are getting closer, but the finish line's a myth. The day that I got started, I made a promise to myself.
The last thing I want to talk about is the vocal like effects in terms of like weird glitchy things that you can do, filters, tremolo stuff. So like the first thing obviously is that I have my vocals going through a filter in the very beginning.
I'm tired of going to war. Every fucking time I try to open the door, my mind is burned from trying to turn the black into gold.
You can see here, it's like cut below like 350, whatever, cut above like 5K. I mean, it's a very obvious way to add contrast to your vocal sound overall. So that's like the first thing. And then the next thing that I do is I kind of like, you know, do a little bit of contrast here and there in terms of like, you know, what vocals I'm adding in. The vocal arrangement in my songs, there's always a lot going on. So what it is, it's like in my verses, for example, there's a low vocal, then a doubled low vocal, then adding the high vocal, then going into the hyperpop form and shifted vocal, then going to the high vocal, That's just a me thing. Like, I will add all these sort of different sort of ways to like spice up my vocal arrangement by like adding shit in and taking stuff out as I see fit. So that's one of the things that I do specifically. And then another thing that I had a lot of fun with in this song is just adding like weird vocal kind of glitchy sounds. For example, in this chorus here, added a tremolo thing to the vocal and like turned it on and off. It's like a trance gate filter. That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. You can also do things like adding chops. I didn't really find it necessary in this song. I didn't want to do too much because I didn't really want to overload people. And for me, it's more about like my songwriting and just the production style overall versus like trying to keep someone entertained every single second. But Brakence is the guy for that. Like, he'll add something fucking new every single time, or he'll just add all this experimental shit just to keep someone entertained every single second of the song, and I think that's fucking dope, honestly. Personally, like, I find that I end up going overboard, and there's a lot of sort of diminishing returns when I start to spend all this time trying to, like, add all these things in when I've already gotten the point of the song across, you know? That's where you'd kind of start. You'd start by, like, adding weird, glitchy sounds and adding, like, vocal sample sounds and, like, warping your vocals and like chopping them and making them sound super glitchy. So that's it. I really hope this was helpful in trying to create a very unique and interesting hyperpop sounding sound for your next track. Remember, like, there are no real rules with this shit. The main thing is just to be as creative as possible and to just have fun with it. I think that that's my favorite thing about hyperpop is the fact that you can really just do whatever and it's all gonna work out because, I mean, think about it. Artists like Brakence and 100 Gex popped off and they were really pursuing this very experimental sound, which just goes to show you that you can really just do whatever you want. People found your music and liked it based on just you being you. So, I mean, I think that's amazing. I have a free resource for you. It's called the Crispy Vocal Toolbox. I will throw that in the link below and you can download that. It's my 33 best tips for how to supercharge your vocal, mainly mixing and production tips. So yeah, until next time, I'll see y'all on the next one. Peace. If you want to learn how to produce, mix, and master your music to sound as great as your favorite songs on Spotify, click the link in the description.